The Harrison Estate ballroom glowed with champagne light and whispered wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast patterns across marble as guests in tailored suits circulated with silver trays. At the center, Brenda Harrison cradled baby Noah in Italian lace, her smile camera-ready. Arthur stood beside her, living the family dream he'd spent millions constructing. But near the column, half hidden in shadow, stood Emma Grant, 8 years old. The housekeeper's daughter. Her fingers clutched her grandmother's necklace, the one that helped her be brave. Emma's eyes moved from the baby to Brenda's face, then to Arthur. She moved forward, weaving between designer heels until she reached him, barely to his waist. Her hand tugged his sleeve. Arthur glanced down. Emma rose on tiptoes and whispered 6 words. "The baby isn't yours, Mr. Harrison." What truth could drive an 8-year-old to shatter a billionaire's christening? Don't look away. Because a single sentence from a child just exposed the darkest secret of a billionaire family. But before we continue, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tell me where you're watching from. Emma hadn't planned to say anything. She was supposed to be invisible, just like her mother Diane, the head housekeeper, who'd spent 15 years moving through the Harrison estate, like air straightening pillows. No one noticed, and polishing silver. No one thanked her for. But Emma had learned something her mother never taught her: invisible people see everything. For 2 weeks leading up to the christening, Emma had been helping her mother prepare for the event. She carried linens, arranged flowers, refilled champagne flutes during rehearsal dinners. And during those 2 weeks, she'd watched Brenda Harrison transform from the sweet stepmother everyone admired into something else entirely. It started with Matthew. Arthur's 10-year-old son from his first marriage was a quiet boy who spent most of his time reading in the library or building model airplanes in his room. Emma had always felt a kinship with him, 2 kids trying not to take up too much space in a house that didn't really belong to them. But lately Matthew had become even quieter. He flinched when Brenda entered a room. He stopped eating at family dinners. One afternoon, Emma was dusting the upstairs hallway when she heard Brenda's voice slicing through Matthew's bedroom door. "You don't fit the image I'm building for this family. You understand that, don't you?" Silence. "When Noah's older, we'll send you to boarding school. Switzerland, maybe. Somewhere far enough that you won't ruin everything I've worked for." Emma's hand froze on the banister. She pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering. "Your father won't fight me on it," Brenda continued, her voice smooth as poison. "He wants me happy. And you make me tired." The door opened. Emma barely made it to the linen closet before Brenda swept past, perfume trailing like a threat. That night, Emma told her mother what she'd heard. Diane's face had gone pale. "Emma, sweetheart, we don't get involved in family matters. It's not our place. But Matthew is Mr. Harrison's son, and Mr. Harrison will take care of him." But Emma knew better. Adults were good at not seeing things they didn't want to see. The real break came the night before the christening. Emma was supposed to be asleep, but the estate was too loud with final preparations. She slipped out of the staff quarters to get water from the kitchen and heard Brenda's voice drifting from the study. The door was cracked open, golden light spilling into the hallway. "Arthur's blinded by his family fantasy," Brenda said into her phone voice, low and sharp. "He'll never question the baby. Why would he? He finally got what he wanted: the perfect wife, the perfect son, the perfect legacy." A pause. Then laughter cold as winter. "Once the will is updated next month, we're set, Paul. The estate, the company shares everything. All I had to do was give him a baby." Emma's blood turned to ice. She wanted to run, wanted to forget, wanted to be the invisible girl who never heard anything that mattered. But then she thought of Matthew's face. The way he'd looked at baby Noah during rehearsal, not with jealousy, but with something worse. Resignation. Like he already knew he was being erased. The next day, during the christening, Emma stood behind the column and watched Brenda hold Noah. The baby was beautiful, dark curls, rosebud mouth, peaceful in sleep. But when Emma looked closer, really looked, things didn't add up. Noah's eyes were gray-blue, almost silver. Arthur's were deep brown. Brenda's were green. And Brenda had announced her pregnancy only 8 months ago. She'd shown barely any belly. She'd even joked about it at a dinner party Emma had served. "I'm one of those lucky women who barely shows. Good genes, I suppose." Emma looked at Arthur standing there with his hand on Brenda's shoulder, smiling like all his broken pieces had finally been glued back together. She thought about her grandmother who'd given her the necklace the week before she died. "Speak truth, little bird," she'd whispered. "Even when your voice shakes." Emma's voice was shaking now as she walked toward Arthur Harrison. She tugged his sleeve. He looked down, surprised, probably seeing her for the first time despite the hundreds of times she'd passed him in hallways. Emma rose on her toes and whispered the truth that would burn his perfect world to ash. "The baby isn't yours, Mr. Harrison. I heard her. She's lying to you." Arthur's smile didn't fade immediately, but his eyes changed just slightly, just enough. The ceremony continued. The priest blessed the baby. Guests applauded. But Emma saw it the way Arthur's gaze lingered on Brenda now. The way suspicion once planted began to grow like poison in fertile ground. Arthur Harrison didn't sleep that night. He stood in his study, the door locked, staring at the baby monitor on his desk. Noah slept peacefully in the nursery down the hall, his small chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Innocent. Perfect. But Emma's words circled his mind like vultures. "I heard her. She's lying to you." He'd built his fortune on instinct, knowing when numbers didn't add up, when a deal smelled wrong, when someone across the table was hiding something. And now that same instinct whispered that the 8-year-old daughter of his housekeeper had seen something he'd been too desperate to notice. At 7 in the morning, Arthur called Matthew into his study. The boy came quietly, as he always did, shoulders slightly hunched like he was trying to make himself smaller. He sat in the leather chair across from Arthur's desk, hands folded in his lap. "Matthew," Arthur said gently, "I need you to tell me the truth about something." The boy's eyes flickered with something, fear or relief, Arthur couldn't tell. "Has Brenda ever said anything to you about Noah? About family?" Matthew's jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing. Then so quietly Arthur almost missed it. "She told me not to say anything." "About what?" "About the night she went to the hospital, when Noah was born." Matthew's voice cracked. "She said if I told you what I saw, she'd make sure I never saw you again, that I'd be sent away, and it would be my fault for ruining everything." Arthur's blood went cold. "What did you see?" "She wasn't pregnant that night, Dad." The words tumbled out now like water breaking through a dam. "I came downstairs for water and saw her leaving in a car. Her stomach was flat, completely flat. And when she came back the next morning, she had a baby." The room tilted. Arthur gripped the edge of his desk. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I'm just a kid, and she's your wife. Who would you have believed?" The question landed like a blade between Arthur's ribs. He dismissed Matthew gently, then sat alone in the expanding silence. Every conversation with Brenda replayed in his mind her convenient pregnancy announcement right after he'd mentioned updating his will. Her refusal to let him attend doctor's appointments. Her insistence on a home birth with a private midwife who'd conveniently left the country. The pattern was there. He'd just been too blind to see it. At noon, Arthur found Brenda in the sunroom arranging roses in a crystal vase. "We need to do a DNA test," he said. No preamble, no softness. Brenda's hands stilled. She turned her face a perfect mask of confusion. "Excuse me. For Noah. A paternity test." She laughed, bright, incredulous, with just the right amount of hurt threading through it. "Arthur, are you serious right now? Are you actually questioning whether our son is yours?" "Yes." The single word cut through her performance. Her smile faltered. "This is insane," she said, setting down the vase with shaking hands. "Some child whispers something ridiculous at our son's christening and you just believe her. Over me, your wife." "It's not just Emma." Arthur's voice remained level cold. "Matthew told me what he saw, and I've been going through the calendar, Brenda. The timeline doesn't work. Matthew is a troubled child who resents—" "Tomorrow morning," Arthur interrupted. "We're going to a clinic, you, me, and Noah. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize for the rest of my life, but we're doing this test." Brenda's face shifted, then the mask cracking just enough for Arthur to glimpse what lived beneath. Calculation. Panic. Cold, crystalline rage. "You're actually going to humiliate me like this, drag your wife and infant son to some clinic because of gossip from the help. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., or I call my lawyers today. That night, Arthur hired security to watch every exit of the estate. At 2 a.m., they caught Brenda trying to leave through the service entrance, Noah bundled in her arms, 2 suitcases already loaded in her car. Arthur met her in the driveway, flanked by his head of security and his personal attorney, Gerald Chen, who'd driven from the city with a portable DNA collection kit. "You're not leaving with him," Arthur said quietly. Brenda held Noah tighter. "You can't keep me here." "No. But I can ensure that if you try to run, every law enforcement agency in the state will know you're fleeing with a child whose paternity is in question." He nodded to Gerald. "We're doing this now. Here. With witnesses and sealed samples." The collection took 10 minutes. Brenda sat rigid in the drawing room while a certified technician swabbed Noah's cheek, then Arthur's, then at Gerald's insistence, Brenda's. "Standard protocol," Gerald explained. "For legal clarity." Brenda's hands trembled as she held Noah afterward, but she said nothing. The samples were sealed, signed, and sent via courier to the most reputable genetics laboratory in the state, with instructions for a 12-hour rush analysis. Arthur waited in his study, the night stretching around him like a wound. At 3:17 a.m., the fax machine whirred to life. Arthur watched the paper emerge line by line, each word a small detonation. "Paternity test results, confidential. Alleged father Arthur James Harrison, child, baby Noah Harrison. Probability of paternity, 0%. Conclusion. Arthur Harrison is excluded as the biological father." Arthur's hands went numb. The paper slipped from his fingers, but the fax machine kept running. A second page emerged. Arthur picked it up, his vision blurring at the edges. "Maternity test results. Confidential, alleged mother, Brenda Catherine Harrison. Child, baby Noah Harrison. Probability of maternity, 0.00%. Conclusion. Brenda Harrison is excluded as the biological mother." The paper fell again. Arthur sat down slowly, the world reorganizing itself into something unrecognizable. Not his son. Not her son. Then whose child was sleeping peacefully in the nursery? And what kind of darkness had he welcomed into his home? Arthur didn't confront Brenda immediately. Years of building an empire had taught him that information was leverage, and right now, he had questions, but no answers. Who was Noah? Where had he come from? And who else was involved in this? By dawn, Arthur had made 3 calls to his head of security, to the city's most ruthless private investigation firm, and to a family attorney who specialized in fraud cases that never made it to tabloids. "I need everything." Arthur told the lead investigator, Marcus Webb, a former FBI agent with a face like weathered stone. "Phone records, financial transactions, hospital records, surveillance footage. I don't care what it costs. I need to know what my wife did and who helped her do it." Marcus assembled his team within hours. They moved through the investigation like surgeons, precise, thorough, and visible. The phone records came first. Brenda's cell showed hundreds of calls to a single number over the past 9 months. The number belonged to Paul Krenler, a name that made Marcus's jaw tighten. "I know this guy," Marcus said, sliding a file across Arthur's desk. "Former attorney disbarred 3 years ago for witness tampering and evidence fabrication. He's been working the gray market ever since, fixing problems for people who can pay and don't ask questions." Arthur stared at Paul's photo, sharp features, expensive suit eyes that held no light. Brenda never mentioned him. She wouldn't. Men like Krenler stay hidden until you need them gone. The financial records told the next part of the story. 6 months ago, Brenda had wired $50,000 to an offshore account linked to a private medical clinic in Nevada, a facility that had been investigated twice for medical fraud, but never charged. 2 weeks before Noah's arrival, another payment, $75,000, to a shell corporation that traced back to Paul Krenler. Marcus pulled hospital records next, calling in favors from contacts Arthur didn't want to know about. "Your wife was admitted to Mercy General 8 months ago," Marcus reported. "Pregnancy complications. She was there for 3 days. And," Marcus's expression darkened, "she lost the baby. Stillbirth at 26 weeks. The death certificate is buried in hospital archives, but it exists." Arthur's throat closed. For a moment, just a moment, he felt a flicker of sympathy. Loss like that could break someone. but then he remembered the cold calculation in Brenda's voice on the phone. Once the will is updated, we're set. This wasn't grief. This was a plan. She was pregnant, Arthur said slowly. But not with my child. Correct. DNA on the fetal remains shows the father was Paul Krenler. Marcus paused. I'm sorry. The affair was one betrayal. But what came after was something else entirely. Marcus's team interviewed the night staff at Mercy General. Most remembered nothing. Brenda Harrison was just another wealthy patient in a private suite. But one nurse, Maria Gonzalez, remembered something that made her uneasy enough to talk. There was a man, Maria told the investigator, in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the hospital. Her hands wrapped tight around her cup. He came to see Mrs. Harrison after the baby. He wasn't family. He had this way of moving through the ward like he owned it. Made me uncomfortable. Paul Krenler. Maria nodded when shown the photo. He stayed for hours. And after he left, Mrs. Harrison was different. Not sad anymore. Focused. Like she'd made a decision. The investigator leaned forward. Did you hear anything they discussed? Just pieces. Something about timing. And how no one would question it if the baby looked right. Maria's voice dropped. I didn't understand then, but now, God help me, I think I do. The final piece came from Brenda's driver Carlos, who'd worked for the Harrison family for 6 years. Marcus's team found him at a bar in Queens nursing a whiskey and a guilty conscience. I drove her that night, Carlos admitted after his 3rd drink. The night she supposedly gave birth at home. She told me to take her to an address in Newark, industrial district. Nothing around but warehouses. What happened there? A woman met us. Middle-aged nurse's scrubs carrying a car seat covered with a blanket. Mrs. Harrison got out. They talked for maybe 2 minutes. Then Mrs. Harrison came back with the baby. Carlos's hands shook. I asked if everything was okay. She said if I ever mentioned it to anyone, I'd lose more than my job. I have a family. I kept quiet. Do you remember the address? Carlos did. Marcus's team raided the warehouse with local police. They found medical equipment, forged birth certificates, and records of 7 other illegal adoptions facilitated through Paul Krenler's network over the past 2 years. But they didn't find Paul. Arthur sat in his study that night, surrounded by documents that painted a picture of calculated evil. Brenda had been pregnant with Paul's child, her lover, her accomplice. When she lost that baby, she panicked. Arthur had been talking about updating his will, about securing Noah's future as his heir. Without a child, Brenda was just another wife who could be replaced. So she and Paul had bought a baby. A newborn with fair skin and European features, who could pass as Arthur's biological son. They'd faked a home birth, paid off a midwife who'd since disappeared, and constructed a reality where Arthur Harrison, desperate for family, blinded by hope, would never question the miracle he'd been given. It was brilliant. Cold, monstrous, but brilliant. At midnight, Arthur called the police. 2 detectives arrived within the hour. Arthur handed them everything: the DNA results, the financial records, witness statements, the warehouse evidence. We'll need to take Mrs. Harrison into custody, the lead detective said. Do it. They arrested Brenda in the master bedroom. She didn't scream or fight. She simply looked at Arthur with something like disappointment. You were supposed to be too grateful to ask questions, she said as they cuffed her. Too desperate for a son to see the truth. Where did the baby come from? Brenda smiled, small, cruel. Does it matter? You got what you wanted. A family. An heir. You should be thanking me. Where did he come from? She said nothing else. Paul Krenler was arrested 3 days later in an apartment in Atlantic City, surrounded by falsified documents and enough evidence to ensure he'd never see daylight as a free man again. In his interrogation, Paul tried to bargain, tried to deal. But eventually he talked. The baby came from a girl, he said, voice flat. Young. Poor. We told her the baby died during delivery. We paid the attending nurse $20,000 to make it happen. Clean. Simple. No one asks questions when a poor girl loses a baby. Arthur listened to the recording later alone in his study and felt something inside him turn to stone. Noah, the child sleeping peacefully in the nursery, had been stolen from a mother who believed he was dead. Somewhere a young woman was grieving a child who was alive, and Arthur Harrison, who'd only wanted a family, had become part of the machinery that destroyed one. Arthur stood in the nursery at 3 in the morning watching the baby sleep. He'd stopped calling him Noah. That name belonged to a lie. But he didn't know what else to call the child who'd been stolen into his life. The baby stirred, whimpered, then settled back into sleep. He was so small, so innocent. None of this was his fault. Arthur reached down and lifted him carefully. The baby's eyes opened, those gray-blue eyes that should have been his first clue. He didn't cry, just looked at Arthur with an expression too old for his weeks-old face. "I'm sorry," Arthur whispered. "I'm so sorry for what they did to you." The next morning, Arthur made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He kept the baby. Not legally, not yet. But he moved the crib into a room adjacent to his own, hired a specialized neonatal nurse, and began the process of caring for a child who had no name and no place in the world. "You're keeping him?" Gerald Chen, his attorney, asked with barely concealed surprise. "Until we find his real family," Arthur said firmly. "This child has been through enough. I won't let him be shuttled into the foster system while lawyers argue over paperwork." Matthew was the one who suggested the name. "Can we call him Jack?" the boy asked one evening, standing in the doorway of the makeshift nursery. "It's a strong name, simple. He seems like a Jack." Arthur looked at his son, his real son, the one he'd almost lost while chasing an illusion. "Jack," he repeated. "Yeah, I think that fits." But Jack was not an easy baby. He cried constantly, sharp, distressed wails that no amount of feeding or rocking could soothe. He flinched at bright lights. He tensed when anyone moved too quickly near him. The pediatrician Arthur hired was blunt. "This baby shows signs of neglect and improper care in his early days. Whoever had him before wasn't meeting his needs. He's frightened. He doesn't trust that the world is safe." Arthur felt rage coil in his chest, not at the baby, but at Brenda, at Paul, at everyone who'd treated this child like a commodity instead of a human being. Slowly, carefully, Arthur learned. He kept the lights dim. He moved slowly. He held Jack for hours, just letting the baby learn that he was safe now. And gradually Jack began to settle. One night, Matthew came into the room where Arthur was feeding Jack a bottle. The 10-year-old sat cross-legged on the floor watching. "He's scared like I was," Matthew said quietly. Arthur looked at his son. "What do you mean?" "When you married Brenda, I was scared all the time that I didn't belong anymore, that there wasn't room for me." Matthew's eyes met his father's. "Jack's probably scared he doesn't belong anywhere either." Arthur set down the bottle and pulled Matthew close with his free arm. "You've always belonged. I'm sorry I made you doubt that." "I know." Matthew leaned into his father's shoulder. "And Jack belongs too, until we find where he really belongs." Marcus Webb's investigation team worked around the clock to trace Jack's origins. Paul had given them the location, a clinic in Newark, and the approximate date. From there, it was a matter of cross-referencing birth records, interviewing staff, and following the trail of women who delivered babies in that time frame. 3 weeks into the search, Marcus arrived at the Harrison estate with information that made Arthur's blood run cold. "We found her," Marcus said, sliding a file across the desk. "Lucy Miller, 19 years old. She gave birth to a son on March 7th. The attending nurse, Sandra Kovach, was on Paul Krenler's payroll. She told Lucy the baby was stillborn, gave her a death certificate, and sent her home." Arthur opened the file with shaking hands. Lucy's face looked back at him from a driver's license photo, young with kind eyes and dark hair. According to the file, she worked 2 jobs to support herself and lived in a small apartment in Newark. "There's more," Marcus said carefully. "Lucy is Diane Grant's niece, your housekeeper's niece." The world stopped. "Diane's niece," Arthur repeated. "Lucy moved to Newark last year to get away from family pressure about the pregnancy. She wanted to do it on her own. The father was a soldier, Jack Miller, named after his grandfather, killed in action 3 months before the baby was born. Lucy wanted to honor him by raising their son." Arthur thought of Diane, quiet, steady Diane, who'd worked in his home for 15 years. Who'd raised Emma to speak truth even when it was dangerous. Does Diane know, Ra? Not yet. Lucy was too ashamed after losing the baby. She stopped answering calls. Diane thinks Lucy is just grieving and needs space. Arthur stood and walked to the window. Outside, Emma was playing in the garden with Matthew, the two of them laughing over something only children understood. Emma had started this. Emma had seen the truth when no one else would look. And now, because of her, a stolen child might find his way home. Set up a meeting, Arthur said, with Lucy and Diane. We're going to tell them everything. Are you sure? Marcus asked. Legally, this could complicate. I don't care about legal complications. Arthur turned his voice steel. Somewhere out there is a mother who thinks her son is dead. We're going to give him back to her. That night, Arthur sat with Jack the baby finally sleeping peacefully in his arms. Your name is Jack Miller, he whispered. Your father was a hero. Your mother thinks you're gone. But you're not. You're here, and tomorrow we're going to start bringing you home. Jack's tiny hand wrapped around Arthur's finger, holding tight. For the first time since this nightmare began, Arthur felt something other than rage or grief. He felt purpose. Not the hollow purpose of building a perfect family for appearance's sake, but the real purpose of doing one thing right in a world that had done so much wrong to this child. Jack deserved the truth. He deserved his real mother. He deserved a life that wasn't built on lies. And Arthur Harrison, who'd been complicit in his theft, however unknowingly, would make sure he got it. Diane Grant collapsed when Marcus told her. She was standing in the Harrison estate kitchen folding linens when the investigator arrived with Arthur. The words came carefully, gently, but there was no soft way to deliver them. Your niece's baby didn't die. He's been here. In this house. The whole time. Diane's knees buckled. Arthur caught her, guiding her to a chair while Emma rushed to get water. Lucy. Diane whispered, tears streaming down her face. Oh God, Lucy. She's been alone all this time thinking. We're going to fix this, Arthur said firmly. Today. Right now. They found Lucy at her apartment in Newark, a third-floor walk-up with peeling paint and windows that faced a brick wall. She answered the door in scrubs. She'd just finished a double shift at a nursing home. Her face exhausted and hollow in the way of people who've stopped expecting joy. When she saw Diane, confusion flickered across her features. Aunt Diane, what are you? Then she saw Arthur Harrison behind her aunt, a billionaire on her doorstep. She tensed, fear replacing confusion. Lucy, Diane said, taking her niece's hands. Sweetheart, you need to sit down. What's wrong? Is someone else dead? The question landed like a stone. Arthur realized this girl had already lost so much: her baby's father, then her baby, that she expected every visitor to bring more death. No one's dead, Arthur said quietly. Lucy, your son is alive. She didn't react at first. The words seemed to pass through her without landing. Then, what? Your baby didn't die, Diane said, gripping Lucy's hands tighter. They lied to you. The nurse lied. He's alive, Lucy. He's been alive this whole time. Lucy pulled her hands free, backing away. That's not funny. That's not. Why would you say something like that? Because it's true. Arthur stepped forward carefully, like approaching something wild and wounded. My wife and her accomplice paid a nurse to fake your son's death. They took him, gave him to me. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. Lucy's face went white. Her back hit the wall. You're lying. I'm not. Arthur pulled out his phone, showed her a photo of Jack sleeping. He has your eyes, and according to the records, he was born March 7th at 11:40 p.m., 6 pounds 3 ounces. Lucy stared at the photo. Her hand came up slowly, fingers trembling as they hovered over the screen. That's my baby. Yes. The sound that came from Lucy wasn't quite a scream. It was something raw, a grief and hope colliding so violently that her legs gave out completely. Diane caught her, and the two women sank to the floor together. Lucy sobbing into her aunt's shoulder with a ferocity that shook them both. Arthur waited, gave them space, let Lucy break apart and begin to piece herself back together with the impossible truth that her son existed. When she could finally speak, Lucy looked up at Arthur with eyes red and fierce. "Where is he? Where's my baby?" "At my home. With a nurse. He's safe, Lucy. I promise you he's safe. I want to see him. Right now. Please." They drove to the Harrison estate in Arthur's car, Lucy in the back seat with Diane holding her hand. She didn't speak the entire drive, just stared out the window like she was afraid if she blinked the dream would shatter. Matthew and Emma were waiting in the foyer when they arrived. Arthur had called ahead, asked them to bring Jack downstairs. Matthew held the baby carefully the way Arthur had taught him. Jack was awake, looking around with those solemn gray-blue eyes. Lucy stopped in the doorway. For a long moment she just stared. Then she took one step forward. Another. Her hands came up shaking so badly Arthur thought she might fall. "Can I?" Her voice broke. "Can I hold him?" Matthew walked forward and carefully transferred Jack into Lucy's arms. The baby looked up at his mother, this stranger who smelled different, whose face he didn't recognize. He started to fuss, the beginning of a cry. But then Lucy made a sound, soft, instinctive, something between a hum and a sob, and Jack went still. His tiny hand reached up, touched her face. And Lucy broke. She crumpled onto the foyer floor, cradling Jack against her chest, rocking back and forth as years of grief poured out of her. "My baby," she whispered over and over. "My baby boy. Mama's here. Mama's so sorry. I'm so sorry I let them take you." Jack didn't cry. He pressed his face against Lucy's chest, his small hand fisting in her shirt, and made a sound that might have been recognition, or might have been need. But either way, it was the sound of a child finding his mother. Diane knelt beside them, one hand on Lucy's back, tears streaming down her own face. Arthur stood apart, Matthew and Emma on either side of him. Emma slipped her small hand into Arthur's, and he squeezed it gently. "You did this," he told her quietly. "You saved him." Emma shook her head. "He was always hers. We just gave him back." They stayed like that, Lucy on the floor with her son Diane beside them, the Harrison family watching from a respectful distance, until the sun moved across the foyer and painted them all in gold. When Lucy finally looked up, her face was transformed. Still tear-streaked, still devastated by what she'd lost and found, but lit from within with something unbreakable. "His name is Jack," she said. "After his father. After his grandfather. Jack Miller. Jack Miller." Arthur repeated, and the name settled into place like it had always belonged. "It's a good name." "The best name," Lucy whispered, pressing her lips to Jack's forehead. "For the best boy in the whole world." Outside, the sun continued its arc across the sky, indifferent to the miracle happening in the Harrison estate. But inside, a mother held her son for the first time in months, and the world, at least for this moment, was exactly as it should be. The legal process took 3 months. DNA tests were reconfirmed. Birth certificates were corrected. Brenda and Paul faced federal charges for fraud, conspiracy, and child trafficking. The nurse, Sandra Kovach, turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence, and her testimony sealed their fate. Brenda would spend 15 years in prison. Paul, with his longer criminal history, got 25. But the real work wasn't happening in courtrooms. It was happening in quieter spaces, therapy offices, hospital rooms, and the Harrison estate itself, which had begun to feel less like a museum and more like a home. Lucy moved into one of the guest houses on the property. Arthur insisted, and for once, Lucy didn't have the strength to refuse charity. She needed to be close to Jack while she rebuilt their bond. The baby knew her, now reached for her, calmed at her voice. But there were still moments when he seemed lost, caught between the trauma of his early weeks and the safety he was slowly learning to trust. Arthur paid for everything: pediatric therapy for Jack, trauma counseling for Lucy, and a lawyer to help her navigate the legal restoration of her parental rights. He did it quietly, without fanfare, in the way of someone trying to atone for sins he hadn't committed, but still felt responsible for. "You don't owe me this," Lucy told him one afternoon. They were sitting on the terrace while Jack napped in his stroller between them. "Yes, I do," Arthur said simply. "I brought evil into my home. That evil hurt you, hurt your son. I can't undo that. But I can make sure you never struggle the way you did before." Lucy was quiet for a moment. Then, He would have liked you, Jack's father. He had this thing about honor, about doing right even when it cost you something. Tell me about him. So Lucy did. She told Arthur about Sergeant Jack Miller who'd proposed before deploying, who'd sent her letters every week until the letters stopped coming. Who'd never known he was going to be a father because Lucy found out 2 weeks after the notification arrived that he'd been killed in action. He was funny, Lucy said, smiling through tears. Always making jokes even when things were terrible. I wanted our son to have that, his father's name, his father's courage. I wanted him to grow up knowing where he came from. He will, Arthur promised. I'll make sure of it. And he did. Arthur established a trust fund in Jack Miller Sr., his name enough to pay for Jack's education from preschool through graduate school, with additional funds for Lucy to start her own life without the weight of poverty crushing her. He also did something else, something that surprised even himself. He asked Emma to his study one morning, Matthew standing beside her. I've been thinking, Arthur said, kneeling to their level. Emma, you changed everything. You saw the truth when I was blind. You spoke up when it would have been easier to stay quiet. You saved this family. Emma shifted uncomfortably. I just said what I heard. You did more than that. You showed courage I'm not sure I would have had at your age or even at mine. He paused. I want to establish an education fund for you. Full scholarship, any school you want, all the way through university. Emma's eyes went wide. Diane, standing in the doorway, gasped. Mr. Harrison, we can't possibly. You can, Arthur said firmly, standing. And you will. Emma deserves every opportunity in the world. This isn't charity, Diane. It's recognition. Your daughter has more integrity than most adults I know. Matthew stepped forward, then looking at Emma with newfound respect. She's basically a detective, he said. Like Sherlock Holmes, but shorter. Emma laughed, a bright, genuine sound that made everyone smile. Over the following weeks, something shifted in the Harrison estate. Lucy and Diane cooked dinner together in the kitchen, their laughter echoing through hallways that had been silent for too long. Matthew taught Emma how to play chess, the two of them spending hours bent over the board in the library. Arthur held Jack during evening feedings, telling him stories about his father. Stories Lucy had shared, stories Arthur embellished with the kind of heroism every child deserves to hear about the parent they'll never meet. One evening, Arthur found Lucy in the garden, pushing Jack in a swing Arthur had installed the week before. I've been thinking about what comes next, Lucy said. I want to go back to school, finish my nursing degree. Jack's father would have wanted that. Whatever you need, Arthur said. We'll make it work. Lucy smiled, the first full, uncomplicated smile Arthur had seen from her. Thank you. For everything. For giving me my son back. Emma gave you your son back, Arthur corrected gently. I just stopped being blind long enough to see the truth. They stood together, watching Jack laugh as he swung higher, his joy untouched by the darkness that had tried to steal his life. This, Arthur thought, was what family actually looked like. Not perfection, not appearances, but people choosing to show up for each other when everything fell apart. 6 months later, Emma sat on the garden bench beside Arthur, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Lucy was on the lawn with Jack, who was finally old enough to sit up on his own. Matthew lay on his stomach nearby, making faces that sent Jack into fits of giggles, real pure laughter that seemed to heal something in everyone who heard it. You did good, Mr. Harrison, Emma said quietly. Arthur looked down at the girl who'd changed everything. We did good. You started it. I just told the truth. That's harder than you think. Arthur watched his son, his real son Matthew, grab Jack's hands and help him stand on wobbly legs. I spent so much time trying to build the perfect family that I almost destroyed the real one. Emma swung her legs, considering this. My grandma used to say family isn't who you're born to. It's who shows up when things get hard. Your grandma was a wise woman. She was. Emma touched the necklace at her throat, the one that had given her courage that day. She'd like this. All of us together. Arthur looked around the garden. Lucy, Diane, Matthew. Emma, Jack. None of them connected by blood to him except Matthew. But all of them bound by something stronger. Truth. Loyalty. The choice to stand together when the world tried to tear them apart. Yeah, Arthur said softly. I think she would. The light shifted, golden hour settling over them like a blessing. Inside the estate, lights began to glow warm, inviting alive. Matthew called out, Dad, come see. Jack took a step. Arthur stood, offering his hand to Emma. Together they walked across the lawn to where his family waited. Not the family he'd tried to manufacture. Not the picture-perfect illusion he'd been desperate enough to believe. But the real thing. Messy, complicated, built on broken pieces that had somehow fitted themselves back together into something beautiful. Arthur knelt beside Jack, who looked up at him with Lucy's eyes and his father's brave spirit, and whispered the truth that had taken him far too long to learn. This is home. This story reminds us that truth often comes from the most unexpected voices. An 8-year-old girl with no power, no status, no reason to be heard saw what adults refused to see. She spoke up when silence would have been easier, safer. And because she did, a stolen child found his way home, and a shattered family discovered what it truly means to be whole. It also teaches us that family isn't about blood or appearances or carefully constructed illusions. It's about the people who choose to stand beside you when your world collapses. Who speak truth, even when it hurts. Who show up not because they have to, but because they refuse to let you face darkness alone. Arthur lost the fantasy he'd been chasing, but he found something far more valuable. A family built on honesty, courage, and the kind of love that doesn't require perfection. Just presence. Just truth. Sometimes the life we need isn't the one we planned. Sometimes it's better. Now, I'm curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Drop a comment and let me know. Thank you for listening and sharing your valuable time with me. For more real-life stories like this, check out the other videos on my channel, and don't forget to subscribe.